Rejected and kicked out by manager, I came back after 10 years as the new owner of the company. The fluorescent lights of Langford and Pierce's conference room buzzed overhead like a swarm of anxious bees. I smoothed down my only decent blazer, a navy blue number I'd found at a thrift store, and tried to ignore the sweat beading at my temples. The PowerPoint slide projected on the wall was mine. The data, the graphics, the strategy, all mine. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled inspiration compressed into 15 slides that could change everything. For them. For me. Let's hear from our intern. The way Ethan Wells said intern made it sound like parasite. He leaned back in his leather chair, phone in hand, barely glancing up. At 38, Ethan was the youngest senior marketing director in the company's history, a fact he managed to work into every conversation. His perfectly tailored suits and meticulously styled hair screamed success, but his eyes held something colder, something hungry. I stood, clutching my notes. Thank you for this opportunity, everyone. My voice wavered slightly before finding its strength. Langford and Pierce has built its reputation on tradition and reliability. But our data shows we're losing market share to more nimble competitors who... Data. Ethan interrupted, finally looking up from his phone. What data exactly did you have access to, Maya? The emphasis on you sliced through the air. The quarterly reports that were shared with the department. I answered, my cheeks burning. Plus, I compiled analytics from our social media platforms and... Please continue enlightening us. His smirk sent ripples of uncomfortable laughter around the table. I took a deep breath and clicked to the next slide. Our target demographic is shifting. Younger consumers want brands that stand for something beyond profit. They crave authenticity and innovation. I revealed my concept, a campaign called Transparency in Transit, a bold initiative that would document the actual process of creating our products, highlighting sustainable practices and authentic human stories behind the brand. The campaign would unfold across platforms, creating immersive experiences where consumers. Immersive experiences? Ethan's laugh cut through my presentation like a knife. I'm sorry, but are we selling marketing services or Disney tickets? More laughter, louder this time. My hands began to tremble. This is precisely why we don't typically let interns present in strategy meetings, he continued, swiveling to address the room rather than me. They've read a few blog posts about disruption and suddenly think they understand decades of established industry practice. I tried to redirect. Actually, the data suggests. The data suggests, he mimicked, his voice pitched higher. Tell me, Maya, have you ever managed a 7-figure marketing budget? Have you ever had to explain to a CEO why their stock dropped after a failed campaign? No, but... No. Exactly. He turned to face the others. This is what happens when we let children play dress-up in corporate spaces. They think business is some kind of TikTok challenge. The room erupted in laughter, some genuine, some clearly forced. I stood frozen, the cursor blinking on my slide like a heartbeat I could no longer feel. Caroline, the HR director, cleared her throat. Perhaps we should move on to the next agenda item? Her smile was apologetic, but she didn't meet my eyes. I sat down, my carefully crafted presentation forgotten. The meeting continued around me, but I heard nothing except the ringing in my ears. 3 weeks of work. 3 weeks of hope. Demolished in 3 minutes. After the meeting, I lingered in the conference room, gathering my notes with trembling hands. Maya. Ethan's voice made me flinch. I hadn't noticed him return. A word. He closed the door and leaned against it, studying me with what almost looked like curiosity. That was quite a performance. I straightened my spine. It wasn't a performance. It was a strategy backed by research and... Let me give you some advice, he cut in, his tone suddenly paternal. This business isn't for dreamers. It's for realists. People who understand the game. Maybe the game needs to change, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. Something flashed in his eyes. Anger? Fear? It vanished before I could identify it. You know what your problem is, Maya? You think you're special. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Every year, Thousands of bright-eyed kids graduate thinking they're going to revolutionize industries they barely understand. Most of them end up managing social media for local restaurants within 6 months. His words stung because they targeted my deepest fear, that I wasn't exceptional enough to make a difference. Your idea wasn't just naive, he continued. It was dangerous. It would have undermined our entire business model. Clients don't want transparency. They want results without complications. That's not what consumers want anymore, I argued, finding my voice again. The research clearly shows. Oh God, enough with the research. He pinched the bridge of his nose as if warding off a headache. Do you know what my first boss told me? Data tells you where you've been, not where you should go. Leadership requires vision, not just analysis. I gathered my courage. And you think my vision is wrong? I think, he said, his tone softening deceptively, that you need to spend more time learning and less time trying to reinvent the wheel. He checked his watch. We'll talk more tomorrow. I have a client dinner. He left me standing there, clutching my presentation notes like a shield. The next morning, I arrived early, determined to prove myself. My desk phone rang at 9:05 a.m. Maya, can you come to HR? Caroline's voice was professionally blank. In her stark office, she sat beside Ethan, both wearing expressions of practiced neutrality. We've decided to terminate your internship program, Caroline said, sliding a document across her desk. This isn't a reflection on your work ethic, but we feel there's a misalignment of expectations. Misalignment. I echoed, the word hollow in my mouth. You're clearly bright, Ethan added, not meeting my eyes. But Langford and Pierce might not be the right culture fit for someone with your particular approach. Culture fit, the corporate euphemism for you don't belong here. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Not really. Within an hour, I had packed my meager belongings into a cardboard box. No goodbye lunch. No parting words from teammates. Just the quiet hum of an office continuing without me. As the elevator doors closed on my brief corporate career, I felt something unexpected beneath the humiliation and grief, a spark. Not of hope exactly, but of defiance. I had lost something today, yes. But somewhere in the echo of Ethan's mockery, in the silence of my colleagues' complicity, in the sterile formality of my dismissal, I found something more valuable than an internship. I found a purpose. I left with nothing, except a broken heart and a burning desire to prove every single one of them wrong. My apartment felt smaller after the firing. For walls closing in on 23 years of ambition suddenly transformed into failure. For weeks, I barely left my bed. The cardboard box from Langford and Pierce sat untouched in the corner, a monument to humiliation. Each job rejection email chipped away at my already crumbling confidence. We've decided to pursue candidates with more experience. The corporate way of saying, you're not enough. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. Rent was 3 weeks overdue, and my savings had evaporated. That night, I sat on my bathroom floor, back against the cool tiles, sobbing until my throat burned. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from Langford and Pierce's social media account. Their newest campaign had launched, a stale, forgettable concept that looked like every other ad in their industry. Safe. Predictable. Boring. Something clicked in my mind. A quiet voice beneath the self-doubt whispered, "Your idea was better." I retrieved the box from the corner and emptied its contents on my floor. Among the pens and sticky notes was my presentation, the one Ethan had mocked. I spread the pages across the carpet, studying each slide with fresh eyes. The campaign wasn't childish. It was forward-thinking. What if Ethan wasn't irritated by my naivety, but threatened by my insight? That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I pawned my graduation watch, a gift from my late father. It bought me 3 more weeks of rent and a domain name, celariomedia.com. I drafted emails to 20 local businesses, offering free social media consultations. 19 ignored me, but Lola's Bakery, a struggling neighborhood spot, replied, "Can't pay much, but let's talk." Lola Santiago had owned her bakery for 30 years. Business was dwindling as flashier chain cafes opened nearby. I can't compete with their marketing budgets, she sighed, serving me the best cinnamon roll I'd ever tasted. You don't need their budget, I said. You need authenticity, the one thing they can't manufacture. We launched a simple campaign, the stories behind the sweets. Each day, Lola shared the genuine history behind one of her recipes, her grandmother's secret ingredient in the tres leches cake, the marriage proposal that inspired her signature engagement cookies. We filmed her 4 a.m. baking routine on my smartphone, capturing the dedication invisible to customers. Each video ended with real customers sharing memories made over her pastries. Within 3 weeks, lines formed outside her door. A local news station ran a feature on her bakery. Sales doubled. Lola paid me $500, enough for another month's rent. More importantly, she referred me to 2 other small businesses. Still, survival remained precarious. I showered at a 24-hour gym with the cheapest membership I could find. Some nights, when clients paid late, I slept in my aging Honda, parking behind the grocery store where I'd dumpster dive for day-old bread and discarded produce. Public libraries became my office, their free Wi-Fi a lifeline. 6 months in, disaster struck. My laptop died, the essential tool for my fledgling business. I had exactly $217 in my account, not nearly enough for a replacement. That evening, standing in the electronics store, staring hopelessly at prices I couldn't afford, a familiar voice called my name. Maya? Is that you? I turned to find Zach Chin, a former Langford and Pierce graphic designer. Heard you got cut, he said, awkwardness hanging between us. That was brutal. I forced a smile, just a detour. His eyes narrowed. You okay? You look fantastic, I offered, painfully aware of my unwashed hair and thrift store clothes. He laughed, then lowered his voice. Look, I left L&P last month. Couldn't stand Ethan's toxic leadership anymore. He hesitated. I'm freelancing now. Been following what you did for Lola's Bakery. That campaign was brilliant. I blinked. You saw that? Half the creatives in the city are talking about it. It's exactly the authentic approach big agencies are failing at. He pulled out his business card. I need a strategist for a client pitch next week. The pay's decent. Interested. That collaboration with Zach marked the true beginning of Clario Media. His design skills complemented my strategy work perfectly. We won the pitch, then another. We moved operations from library tables to a tiny shared workspace. I rehired another Langford and Pierce castaway, their former data analyst who'd been laid off during restructuring. Then came an account manager, a content creator, a web developer, all talented individuals undervalued at traditional agencies. 1 year after my humiliation in that conference room, Clario Media had 11 employees and a real office. Modest, but ours. Our client roster grew as word spread about our results. I developed the concept Ethan had ridiculed into our signature approach: transparency marketing. We helped brands reveal their authentic stories and processes, creating genuine connections with consumers. The approach resonated especially with younger markets, exactly as my research had predicted. Out of curiosity and perhaps a touch of spite, I kept tabs on Langford and Pierce. Their stock was sliding. Trade publications described them as struggling to adapt to changing consumer expectations. They began desperately copying trends, including several pioneered by smaller agencies like mine. On the 2nd anniversary of my firing, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Congratulations from an admirer." It was from Caroline, the former HR director, who had overseen my termination. "I've been watching your success from afar," she wrote. "Langford and Pierce made a terrible mistake. Ethan's leadership has driven the company to the brink. They've lost 3 major accounts this quarter alone." Her message ended with a question that made my heart race. Would you consider taking on L&P as a client? They need the very innovation you tried to bring them. I leaned back in my chair, a strange calmness washing over me. The universe had a peculiar sense of humor. I typed my reply. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. I have bigger plans for Langford and Pierce. And I did. Plans they couldn't possibly imagine. 10 years can change everything. On the 10th anniversary of Clario Media, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of our downtown headquarters, watching the city's skyline glitter in the dusk. 42 employees now called this place home. Creatives, strategists, data scientists, and visionaries who shared my belief that marketing could be both authentic and profitable. My assistant knocked gently before entering. "They're ready for you in the conference room." I nodded, taking one last look at the view. "The last meeting as Clario Media," I murmured. 3 representatives from Horizon Global Partners, one of the largest investment firms in the country, waited inside. Their offer had come unexpectedly, a staggering acquisition deal that valued my company at 9 figures. But it wasn't the money that made me agree. It was the second part of their proposal. "Ms. Reyes, these are the final documents," said Warren Chen, Horizon's acquisition director, pushing a thick contract across the table. "Once you sign, the transition process begins." I scanned the room, meeting the eyes of my leadership team. We discussed this at length, debated the risks and rewards. This wasn't just an exit strategy, it was an evolution. "Before I sign," I said, "I want confirmation on the special provision we discussed." Warren nodded. "It's all there on page 27. Upon acquisition, you'll be appointed as Strategic Integration Director for our newest subsidiary, Langford and Pierce." A thrill ran through me as I heard the names spoken aloud in this context. Langford and Pierce, once my dream employer, then my greatest humiliation, now about to become my responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Over the past decade, while Clario Media had flourished, Langford and Pierce had floundered. Their rigid adherence to outdated marketing philosophies had cost them market share year after year. 3 months ago, facing bankruptcy, they had quietly agreed to a hostile takeover by Horizon Global Partners. What Horizon wanted was simple: someone who could either resurrect the failing agency or salvage its valuable client relationships and intellectual property. Who better than the founder of a thriving competitor intimately familiar with their weaknesses? What they didn't know, what no one knew except my closest confidants, was that I had been orchestrating this moment for years. The moment when I would walk back through those glass doors not as an intern, not as a vendor, but as the effective owner. I signed the papers. "Congratulations, Ms. Reyes," Warren said. "Horizon looks forward to seeing how you'll transform Langford and Pierce." I smiled. So do I. The transition happened swiftly. Officially, I was Horizon's appointed executive, tasked with revitalizing a struggling legacy brand. Unofficially, I was the architect of a strategy years in the making. 2 weeks after the acquisition, I entered Langford and Pierce's headquarters for the first time in a decade. The lobby had been renovated, but the atmosphere remained the same: stilted, pretentious, desperately clinging to an image of success that no longer matched reality. The receptionist didn't recognize me. Why would she? The frightened intern with a cardboard box had transformed into a confident executive in a tailored suit. "Maya Reyes for the executive meeting," I said, enjoying the weight of my visitor badge. One day only, soon, I'd have permanent credentials. The 15th floor conference room hadn't changed. Same long table, same city view, same air of entitlement. As executives filtered in, I studied their faces. Mostly strangers, a few vaguely familiar. None of them knew who I really was. Not yet. Then he walked in. Ethan Wells had aged. Gray threaded his once perfectly styled hair, and his posture had lost some of its arrogance. According to my research, after several failed campaigns and lost clients, he'd been demoted from senior marketing director to mid-level strategy lead. Still, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed in his own importance. He didn't even glance at me as he took a seat, absorbed in his phone. At precisely 10 a.m., Warren Chen entered and called the meeting to order. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering on short notice. As you know, Langford and Pierce is now a subsidiary of Horizon Global Partners." He paused, allowing the murmurs to subside. We've appointed a strategic integration director to oversee the transition and future direction of your agency. Ethan finally looked up, his expression bored. I'd like to introduce Maya Reyes, founder and CEO of Clario Media, which has also joined the Horizon family. The room temperature seemed to drop as I stood. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Our reputation had certainly preceded us. Clario had poached 4 major clients from Langford and Pierce in recent years. Thank you, Warren, I said, taking my place at the head of the table. I'm looking forward to working with all of you during this transition. Ethan's face remained blank. No recognition, no memory of the intern he'd humiliated and discarded. For those who don't know me, I continued, I actually began my career at Langford and Pierce as an intern about 10 years ago. A flicker of something crossed Ethan's face. Confusion, perhaps. It was brief but educational, I added, enjoying the slow dawning of horror in his eyes as recognition finally hit. In fact, I believe I presented in this very room. Something about transparency marketing and authentic consumer connections. Ethan's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes widened, then narrowed. Maya, he said, his voice a blend of disbelief and growing dread. I smiled. Hello, Ethan. It's been a while. The room fell silent as the other executives glanced between us, sensing the undercurrent, but not understanding its source. For those who weren't here a decade ago, I continued smoothly. Mr. Wells and I have history. He was instrumental in shaping my career path, though perhaps not in the way he intended. Ethan's face had gone ashen. The man who had once made me feel small now seemed to be shrinking before my eyes. In the coming weeks, we'll be reassessing everything: leadership structure, client strategies, company culture. I emphasized the last 2 words, watching Ethan's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Some roles will be eliminated. Others will be transformed. By this time next month, this will be a very different agency. I smiled at the anxious faces around the table. For better or worse, change has finally come to Langford and Pierce. And I promise you, it's long overdue. The initial leadership meeting ended with stunned faces and nervous whispers. As executives filed out, I called after them. Ethan, could you stay behind, please? He paused, shoulders tensing visibly before turning around. The conference room emptied until only we remained, the ghost of our past encounter hanging between us. So, he said, attempting a smile that came across as a grimace. Quite the plot twist. I gestured to the chair beside me. Have a seat. He sat reluctantly, maintaining the practiced composure of someone accustomed to navigating corporate. But the slight tremor in his hands betrayed him as he straightened his tie. Congratulations on your success, he offered, voice strained with forced cordiality. Clario Media has made quite a name for itself. Thank you. We've had a good run. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until he finally broke it. Look, Maya, about what happened. 10 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago, I supplied, watching him flinch at the precision. Yes, let's talk about that. I opened my laptop and pulled up a file. After the acquisition negotiations began, I had our legal team review my termination paperwork from Langford and Pierce. Interesting reading. His eyebrows rose. I'm sure the statute of limitations on hurt feelings has expired. The dismissive comment, so reminiscent of his old arrogance, sent a flash of anger through me. But I kept my voice level. This isn't about feelings, Ethan. It's about patterns. I turned the screen toward him. You've overseen the termination or resignation of 16 promising employees in the past decade, disproportionately women and minorities, all with similar notes about culture fit or alignment issues. His face darkened. That's confidential HR information. Not anymore. Not to me. I closed the laptop. Everything is mine to review now. He leaned back, a calculating look replacing his unease. I get it. This is your revenge fantasy playing out. Must feel good. If I wanted revenge, I could have buried this agency years ago. I replied. I could have poached every valuable client instead of just the 4 we took. This isn't about revenge. Then what is it about? I studied him. Older now, still handsome in that conventional way, but his confidence seemed hollow, propped up by title and tradition rather than actual innovation or results. Tell me something, Ethan. Do you remember what I proposed that day? The actual content of my presentation. He shifted uncomfortably. Something about transparency, social media strategies. Transparency in transit, I corrected. A campaign framework built around authentic brand storytelling and consumer connection. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Right. I pulled up a second file on my laptop, a collection of industry articles spanning the last 5 years. Headlines like Authenticity Marketing, The New Frontier, and Transparency Campaigns Driving Record Engagement for Global Brands. The approach you called childish fantasy is now standard practice for the most successful brands in the world, I said. While you were clinging to outdated methods, the entire industry evolved around you. His jaw tightened. Markets change. Obviously, we would have adapted our approach eventually. Eventually, I echoed. But it's too late now, isn't it? Your client list is half what it was 5 years ago. Your creative team has a turnover rate of 68%. And your last 3 major campaigns were derivative copies of strategies pioneered by smaller, more innovative agencies. I paused, including mine. Standing, I walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You know what the saddest part is? This company had everything: resources, talent, market position. All it lacked was leadership willing to evolve. When I turned back, Ethan's expression had changed from defensive to deflated. For the first time, I saw not the man who had humiliated me, but someone facing the ruins of his own making. What happens now? He asked quietly. Mass layoffs? Complete restructuring? That depends. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were 2 documents, a retirement package and a contract for a significantly reduced role. Option 1, early retirement with a generous severance. You announce your departure next week, citing personal reasons. Clean break, reputation intact. He opened the folder, scanning the terms. And option 2, you stay but in a different capacity. Special projects coordinator, reporting directly to me. Your salary would be adjusted accordingly. A demotion, he said flatly. A second chance, I corrected. Something I never got. His fingers tightened on the folder's edge. And if I refuse both options? Then we proceed with a formal review of your leadership history, including those 16 terminations and the multiple harassment complaints that were mysteriously resolved without investigation. The color drained from his face. That's blackmail. That's accountability, I countered. Something this agency has lacked for far too long. He stared at the documents, the weight of a decade's worth of decisions visibly settling on his shoulders. Why would you want me to stay at all? Why not just fire me? I considered the question carefully. The truth was more complex than simple revenge or justice. Part of me did want to see him humbled, to witness the dismantling of his artificial authority. But another part, the leader I had become, saw beyond personal satisfaction. Because despite everything, you know this agency's history, its clients, its strengths and weaknesses. That institutional knowledge has value during a transition. I paused. And because I believe people can change when properly motivated. His laugh was hollow. You think I'll have some dramatic revelation and become a better person? I don't need you to have a moral awakening, Ethan. I just need you to do your job under new leadership and new values. He looked up, studying me with newfound assessment. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've had 10 years to plan this moment, I replied simply. After a long silence, he reached for a pen and pulled the second document toward him, the demotion rather than retirement. Always the unexpected choice, I remarked as he signed. I'm not giving you the satisfaction of running me out, he said, a hint of his old defiance returning. I smiled. I was counting on that. As he stood to leave, I added, first assignment in your new role. Pull the data on that transparency campaign I proposed 10 years ago. Update it. Show me what it would look like implemented today. The perfect symmetry of the request wasn't lost on him. His pride battled visibly with his practicality, before he gave a curt nod. "Welcome to the new Langford and Pierce, Ethan. I think you'll find things operate quite differently now." The first month at Langford and Pierce felt like performing surgery while the patient was still running a marathon. Every system needed overhaul, but the agency couldn't afford to stop servicing existing clients. Late nights became my new normal as I divided my time between emergency meetings, strategy sessions, and damage control. We lost 2 major clients in the first week. Both had been teetering on the edge before my arrival. The exodus sent tremors through the agency, but I refused to let panic take hold. "This isn't the end," I told the nervous staff at an all-hands meeting. "This is the beginning of something better." My first major decision shocked everyone. I eliminated the traditional department hierarchy. The rigid chain of command that had stifled innovation for years was replaced with collaborative teams organized around client needs rather than arbitrary divisions. "But this isn't how agencies operate," protested Richard Langford III, grandson of the founder and largely ceremonial board member. "That's precisely the point," I replied. The second wave of changes targeted the agency's toxic work culture. Anonymous surveys revealed a troubling pattern. Ideas were regularly stolen by senior staff, credit was monopolized by department heads, and working endless overtime was considered a badge of honor rather than a management failure. I implemented a transparent attribution system for creative concepts, established reasonable working hours, created pathways for junior staff to lead projects when they showed promise. Most controversial was my hiring initiative. For years, Langford and Pierce had recruited exclusively from elite universities and competitor agencies, a practice that had created an echo chamber of privileged perspectives. I redirected the talent acquisition team to seek out overlooked creatives from diverse backgrounds, especially those who had faced rejection from traditional agencies. One morning, I arrived to find Ethan waiting outside my office, clutching a thick folder. In the weeks since his demotion, he had kept a low profile, attending meetings but rarely speaking. "Your revised transparency campaign," he said, setting the folder on my desk. I opened it, scanning the updated strategy. It was surprisingly thorough. Ethan had not only updated the original concept but had expanded it, integrating current tools and platforms that hadn't existed a decade ago. "This is actually good," I admitted, looking up to find him standing awkwardly by the door. "I did some research on your work at Clario," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The Lola's Bakery campaign. The authenticity approach with Vantage Tech. I see what you were trying to tell us 10 years ago." The admission caught me off guard. "Thank you for acknowledging that." A complicated expression crossed his face. "I've been asking myself why I reacted so strongly to your presentation back then. And I think I saw in you what I used to be, before I got comfortable, before I started protecting my position instead of pushing boundaries." He gestured to the folder. "Your idea threatened my expertise. It was easier to dismiss you than to admit the industry was changing in ways I wasn't prepared for." The honesty surprised me. "That's insightful." "Don't look so shocked," he said with a hint of his old sharpness. "I'm capable of self-reflection when properly motivated." He echoed my words from our previous meeting. I tapped the folder. "We'll implement this for Westridge Financial first. It's our most forward-thinking client. You'll lead the transition team." His eyebrows shot up. "After everything? Consider it a test," I replied. "Prove you can adapt, and there might be a future for you here after all." As Ethan left, my assistant showed in Zach Shin, my former colleague who had become Clario's creative director and now held the same position at the restructured Langford and Pierce. "You gave Ethan a project to lead?" he asked incredulously. "The guy who got us both fired?" "People can surprise you," I said. "Besides old dogs, new tricks, and all that." Zach laughed. "Speaking of new tricks, the open-source brainstorming platform is live. Every employee can now see current projects and contribute ideas regardless of their position. This initiative, allowing anyone from interns to executives to collaborate on creative solutions, was perhaps my proudest innovation yet. Any participation so far?" I asked. Zach grinned. 37 contributions in the first hour, including 3 from the mailroom staff. By the end of the second quarter, The changes were showing measurable results. Employee satisfaction scores had risen 42%. Turnover dropped by half. Most importantly, we landed 2 prestigious new clients who specifically cited our fresh approach as the deciding factor. The revamped transparency campaign for Westridge Financial, led by a surprisingly energized Ethan, exceeded performance metrics by 68%, earning industry recognition and sparking interest from several Fortune 500 companies. One afternoon, wandering through the redesigned creative floor where walls had been replaced with glass partitions and collaborative spaces, I passed Ethan's new office. It was indeed smaller, as the brief had stated, but not as dreary as I had imagined. Through the glass, I could see him hunched over his desk, surrounded by marketing journals and industry publications, many featuring case studies from Clario Media. He looked up and caught me watching. After a moment's hesitation, he gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not quite respect, not quite friendship, but something like professional recognition. I nodded back. That evening, as I was leaving, I found a note on my desk. In Ethan's handwriting, it simply read, "You were right." It wasn't a childish fantasy. The admission cost him pride, but it gave me something unexpected: closure. The past couldn't be undone. The hurt couldn't be erased. But in rebuilding Langford and Pierce, in transforming it from a symbol of my rejection into a testament to my vision, I had reclaimed something more valuable than revenge. I had reclaimed my narrative. And in an industry built on stories, that was the most powerful victory of all. 1 year after my takeover, Langford and Pierce was nearly unrecognizable, both physically and culturally. The stuffy, closed-door offices had given way to open, collaborative spaces. The rigid hierarchies had dissolved into fluid, project-based teams. Most importantly, the fear that had permeated the agency, fear of speaking up, fear of taking risks, fear of challenging conventions, had been replaced with a palpable energy of innovation. We were planning a rebrand gala, celebrating not just the agency's transformation but the first anniversary of what industry insiders now called the Reyes Revolution, a new approach to agency structure that several competitors had begun to imitate. The morning of the event, I arrived early to find the office already humming with activity. Caterers arranged elegant displays in the reception area, while technical crews tested lighting and sound for the evening's presentations. Ms. Reyes called a familiar voice. Caroline, the former HR director who had overseen my termination, now worked as our employee experience consultant, a role that harnessed her institutional knowledge while limiting her previous power to enforce toxic practices. The final guest list for your approval. As I reviewed the names, a particular one caught my eye: Jacob Mercer, CEO of Horizon Global Partners, the investment firm that had acquired both Clario Media and Langford and Pierce. I didn't realize Jacob was attending, I remarked. Caroline nodded. He confirmed yesterday. Apparently, Langford and Pierce's profitability metrics have made quite an impression at the executive level. The numbers didn't lie. In 12 months, we had reversed a 5-year decline, increased revenue by 38%, and reduced operational costs by 22%, all while improving employee satisfaction and client retention. What had begun as my personal mission had become one of Horizon's most successful turnaround stories. Hours later, dressed in a deep blue gown that reminded me of my thrift store blazer from a decade ago, I stood in the wings of the makeshift stage in our transformed lobby. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see the gathered crowd: employees, clients, industry peers, and media representatives. "Ready?" asked Zach, adjusting his bow tie nervously. I took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. As we stepped onto the stage, applause rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed. Under the spotlight, I could make out familiar faces: my original team from Clario, new hires who had joined our revolution, and even a few former skeptics who had been won over by results. And there, at a table near the back, sat Ethan Wells. No longer the arrogant director who had crushed my dreams, nor the humbled mid-manager struggling to adapt, but something in between, a professional finding his way in a changed landscape. "Good evening," I began. 10 years ago, I stood in a conference room not far from here and presented an idea. That idea was rejected, not because it lacked merit, but because it challenged the status quo. I paused, scanning the attentive faces. Today, we celebrate not just the success of that idea, but the power of all the ideas that follow when we create space for them to thrive. The presentation that followed showcased our journey, the struggles, the breakthroughs, the remarkable campaigns that had redefined both the agency and the industry's expectations. Video testimonials from clients punctuated my narrative, reinforcing the impact of our transparency-based approach. We've proven that authenticity isn't just good ethics, it's good business, I concluded. And we're just getting started. As the applause swelled, Jacob Mercer approached the stage. Without any prior notice, he took the microphone. When Horizon acquired this failing agency alongside Clario Media, many questioned the strategy. He admitted to the crowd. But Maya Reyes didn't just save Langford and Pierce. She transformed it into the model for our entire portfolio. He turned to face me, which is why the board has unanimously voted to create a new position, Chief Innovation Officer for Horizon Global Partners. Maya, we'd like you to bring your vision to all our holdings. Gasps and whispers rippled through the audience. This wasn't just a promotion. It was an opportunity to scale my approach across dozens of companies, affecting thousands of employees and millions of consumers. The celebration continued late into the night. As the crowd thinned, I found myself alone on the balcony overlooking the city, processing the unexpected turn of events. Quite a night, came Ethan's voice behind me. I turned to find him holding 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to me. Quite a year, I countered, accepting the glass. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history and transformed present hanging between us. Will you take the position? He finally asked. I'm considering it. He nodded. They'd be lucky to have you. After a pause, he added, we all were. The simple acknowledgement, something I had once desperately craved, now felt like just one milestone on a much longer journey. You know, I said, for years, I defined myself by that moment of rejection. Every success was a step away from being that humiliated intern with the cardboard box. And now, I considered the question. Now I realized that intern was never who I was. She was just where I started. As the party wound down, I found myself drawn to the podium once more. The remaining guests quieted as I stepped up to the microphone. Before we end tonight, I want to share one final thought. My voice carried across the now intimate gathering. To every intern who's been silenced, to every junior employee whose ideas have been dismissed, to everyone who's been told they don't belong in the room where decisions are made, your story doesn't end at rejection. Sometimes it starts there. My eyes found Ethan at the back of the room. He raised his glass slightly, a gesture of respect from a man who had once been my greatest obstacle and was now, improbably, a witness to my triumph. He was clapping, along with everyone else. But I no longer needed his approval. I had finally become the author of my own story. And the next chapter was just beginning.